Hey everyone, I'm here with Ed Yates. He's a leading expert in helping pharma companies win at retail. Fun fact, Ed and I have worked together for the past several decades in the pharma industry in many parts of the world, and we wanted to put together a conversation on how leading pharma companies are winning at the retail pharmacy. And just to get started, Ed, related to winning in retail pharmacy, you coined a term called therapeutic area management. What is this?
Uh, Therapeutic Area Management, or TA management, is a systematic process for retailers and suppliers to work together for better patient health. It's based on category management, which is a very common practice in FMCG.
And what would you say are the big objectives? Like if you think about a pharma company, a retail pharmacy, what are the big objectives that bind these two together for
Three
driving
things,
value?
really. It's more people who need treatment and getting the right treatment. It's about the quality of that treatment over time and proper usage of the medication so that people use it in the right way at the right time.
You know, it's been our experience a lot of times when we talk to new pharma companies that aren't engaged in this or not heavily invested in retail. They always ask the question, well, why is retail even important? And even logically, when you think about our own experiences, most of that happens. You get a sickness, you go into the doctor, they give you this prescription, you walk into the pharmacy, almost a little bit like sleepwalking, they fill it, and then you get it. So I think a big question is, why invest in this channel versus putting all the resources against the HCP?
Well, your patient's there. Let me give you a few facts. More than 30% of prescriptions, we've done research in over 40 countries. So what we've learned is over 30% of prescriptions are actually initiated at the pharmacy. Pharmacy is the second biggest influence across the patient journey, second to doctors, with over 40% of patients saying that pharmacy is a big influence. And a third fact, patients we see that somewhere between 20 and sometimes 50% of prescriptions are actually switched at the pharmacy. So, in a word, it's influence.
Yeah, I know this is a big aha for a lot of pharma companies. Some pharma companies have even quantified size of prize in the billions of dollars when you start to realize how much influence can happen in at the pharmacy, especially in some emerging markets. And I guess another question about this, has it always been this way, or how has this evolved over the past decade?
I think there's always been some opportunity in pharmacy. What's changed though is two big changes. One is sort of retail health, which is emerging. So 18,000, if you go to Mexico, there are 18,000 pharmacies where there's doctors writing prescriptions. That's a major change. Over 30% of vaccinations in the US are now at the pharmacy. That wasn't true years ago. And like in a place like Brazil, in some therapeutic areas, pharmacists are now starting to be allowed to write the prescription. So the world's changing, has changed a lot in the last few years.
Yeah, and then like thinking about this idea of skate where the puck is going, like if you look on the HCP side, there's been a huge consolidation from individual practices or small group practices into more health systems. That kind of changes the way a lot of pharma companies are looking at that channel. What about retail? Do you feel that we're at a maturation point, or what do you project
Now,
into the future?
yeah, if you look for, doctors, as everybody knows, are increasingly hard to reach. Meanwhile, the other big change that's happened in pharmacy is the technology, of course, right? The digital platforms that have come online in the last 10 years, whether it be, one to many or one to one, have all developed and now they're in place in all the major chains around the world. They're just really they're just getting started in how to leverage those platforms to improve patient health and improve profit. So I see the opportunity growing extremely high over the next 10 to 12 years.
Yeah, with this said, if you think about the landscape of pharma companies with this kind of data, the role of retail being so important in a go-to-market, you would expect or hope or imagine that most pharma companies are all over this. There's great collaboration. They're working together to improve patient outcomes. What would you say is the current state of collaboration in this channel?
Yeah, highly underdeveloped. I mean, with the exception largely in either Latin America or in East Asia, most pharma companies aren't engaging in the way they can with pharmacy retailers. It's highly underdeveloped.
Why do you think this is true? What do you think are the big barriers? For example, is it budgets? Is it culture? Is it a lack of awareness? What do you think drives this?
Well, I think it is culture. You know, the culture in pharma has always been let's focus on the doctor. Just like in FMCG, it was always let's just advertise to the consumer. FMCG discovered retail was a great way to reach that consumer. And I think pharma hasn't really figured that out yet. They still, traditionally, they still look at pharmacy as a cost in the gross to net to be reduced, not as a partner to leverage.
So, what would you say, or how would you articulate the consequences of not leaning in and winning in this channel? What's the so what?
Well, there's health and there's dollar implications to this, right? People aren't getting as much treatment as they might if we use the pharmacy, and we've seen it. Let me give an example, Latin American example in cardio, for instance, right? We did some work with a client. They discovered the number of people taking preventative medication was less than 50%.
Hmm.
Meanwhile, adherence, and this is true, I think if you know anything about adherence, it's usually not good. Adherence was below 60%. And then when we looked at the patient journey, I guess not surprisingly, the RX is the trip driver in almost every trip to the pharmacy. So the basket implications of not leveraging that are massive. So lots of opportunities, both from a health and a dollar
Why
perspective.
don't we put a finer point on that? Maybe fill in the blank of this. Let's say I'm a global pharma company. I've got all my resources, rightfully so, on the HCP. I'm really winning there. How would you quantify the commercial value of maybe not driving at this channel?
Yeah, I mean, it varies by TA, it varies by market, but in an area where the pharmacy plays a big role, you could be leaving 10% of the TA value on the table by not engaging through pharmacy. Maybe more.
Yeah. Yeah, that's massive when you look at the level of billions of dollars of a lot of a lot of these drugs. And maybe expand a little bit more on that. When you talk about the therapeutic areas, I think some are more of a fit for retail pharmacy than others. So, like most things, being probably the right answer is to be more surgical in which categories or therapeutic areas you're investing.
Yeah,
What's the best way to think about this?
that's a great question, John. Obviously, number one is it dispensed at pharmacy or if it's a vaccine provided at pharmacy. So that's number one. Number two, products that are used frequently tend to be more like what we call a retail personality. And then finally, you know, the highly regulated drugs like, you know, opioids and psychotropics that, you know, are not really focused on retail. So what do we mean by that? So there's areas of diabetes, cardio, weight loss, men's and women health, smoking cessation. These are all areas where the TAs are very retail oriented.
You mentioned something earlier about regulation, and I know when we've worked in markets, there's all different levels of regulation, based on where you are in the world. How would you say at a high level, what's the best way to describe regulation and how does it vary by market?
Yeah, it varies a lot. So you really have to look at it on a market by market basis. But if you want an overview, there are what we call light markets, and there's an element of patient choice there generally, and then there's an ability to communicate to the patient, although generally somewhat restricted, but you can communicate. There are dark markets where patient choice is quite low and the communication can be very limited. So think Northern Europe is what we would call a dark market. Light markets would be Latin America, Asia. Those are what we call light markets.
And then how would you characterize the US?
Well, as in all things healthcare, the US is atypical. There's not a lot of patient choice, but the media, the communication are highly unregulated, right? You're allowed to communicate extensively with the patient. So TA management develops very differently in the US than, say, Asia, Latin America, and certainly from Northern Europe.
Yeah, so I'd say we covered a lot of the role of the retail pharmacy, why it's important, the impact. And in the I guess, the auspices of therapeutic area management. Today, we won't get into all the nuts and bolts. I think if people want to reach out, they can ask. But if a pharma company was to ask you, hey, I want to get into this, I want to go after that 10%, what's the 80 for 20? What are the three big things that a company can do today to get started down this path?
Yeah, obviously you don't jump with both feet into TA management. If I was started from scratch, one, let's do the patient journey. Let's understand the patient journey so I can understand the role of pharmacy in that journey. So that would be number one. Number two, I then would look across the areas. Is it creating more awareness and incidence? Is it, penetration? Is it getting better care and conversion, or is it adherence, which is always an opportunity in pharmacy? And quantify those. Where do I think the opportunity in health and monetary terms is? Then third, with that in hand, engage your retailer. Start some sort of joint business planning process to learn, to explore, to create some value. And that's the way I would get started. That's why our clients.
Yeah, I'll just summarize that real quick. These three steps. The first one is every pharma company should have a patient journey. And with that patient journey, you're going to be able to understand where to play, of where retail pharmacy is going to be critical to win. And then with that, you can actually develop a commercial size of prize. You referenced 10% on average. We know that if you're going to be getting resources or influencing in corporate, you'll need to develop that size of prize. And then lastly, the simplest way is just developing a joint business plan around these key value drivers of the objectives of improving healthcare and those things.
That's the way I'd start the journey to TA management.
Well, that's great. I know there's a million things. We don't want to make it overcomplicated, but there's certainly a lot more under the hood for this. What's the best way if people are interested to learn more? How can they get in touch?
We've attached a short, overview of TA management to this podcast, and you can download that. And certainly you can reach out directly to me and Jon, either through LinkedIn or by email, and we'll be happy to talk to you more about TA management.
Oh, great. Thanks, Ed. And for our audience, I hope everyone gained a further perspective on, this therapeutic area management as really an approach of how leading pharma companies are winning at retail. Just want to thank everyone and feel free to reach out for more information.